Last weekend I went to my local watch shop and I walked in not wanting to get a watch. Big mistake. I ended up with the Oris Diver 65. And I should know better because I just keep doing this, but today that's what we're talking about. This is the Oris Diver 65. Specifically, this is the 36mm model, and I love it. It just looks so freaking fantastic on my wrist. I'm eating it up right now. It has a really cool bronze bezel, but before we get way into that, I'm Keanu. I like to make these videos to kind of document my collecting journey, and this is going to be the topic of today's video. I want to take you somewhere, but before we get there, let's talk about the specifications. So it is a 36mm dive watch. I know it's crazy, but trust me, it's really cool. It's going to be 42mm lug to lug. It's going to have a 12mm thickness, and we'll talk about the lug width later because that'll be in the cons section. So like I said, this watch comes in 36mm, but it also comes in a 38, 39, and 40mm option. I believe there's a bigger one with a chronograph as well, but we're not going to talk about that one today. And this Oris Divers line comes in a whopping 95 different models on Oris's website right now you can get. That's insane. I love it when brands... Oh hey, look, a squirrel. So this line of Oris Divers has a ton of different variation. There's one with a power reserve of 120 hours. That's more than double my Rolex Oyster Perpetual. They have this cotton candy line that's really awesome. I love that one. They just came out with the steel models. It used to come in all bronze. That's another thing. They are experimenting with different case materials, not just gold, not just stainless steel, bronze, which I think is really cool. And it's not everyone's cup of tea. I don't like the big bronze ones where they're just straight bronze. They kind of smell like a penny if you've ever had them in person. This one, because it just has a little bit of two-tone bronze, it doesn't smell like a penny, and I freaking love it. I love the accents. I think stainless steel is always going to be a classic, but having those gold, the bronze, but they look borderline gold accents, I think they look awesome. Oris is a respectable watchmaker. They're independent, and I love the brand itself, but we'll talk about that later more in the pro section. But let's get back to the one we're talking about today. This is the Oris Diver 65 and the 36mm with the bronze bezel. I love the vintage aesthetic of the Oris Diver 65 because it comes with those vintage aesthetics, but it's going to have the modern specs to go with it. So the movement in this watch is going to be automatic, and it's going to beat at 4 Hertz. And the movement inside is going to have quick set date as well as an instantaneous date jump, which I think is really cool. It's a little touch that they don't have to add in there, but I like it. It's a Salida movement, so if that means anything to you, it's going to be Swiss, and that's awesome. I think for an entry-level watch, having it be Swiss-made is always a fun thing, especially for new people who are into collecting. Seeing that Swiss-made movement is going to be kind of a cool, it's still going to have some story to it. To people like me or other people who are more deeply into this hobby, you're going to know that Salida makes some really great movements. They're going to be affordable to service, but it's nothing special. You're not getting a fully decorated movement. This is technically Oris's 733 movement. That means it's going to be slightly decorated. I believe it's going to have a red rotor on it, but it doesn't mean that you're getting some crazy handcrafted finishing. It's just going to be basically a Salida movement. So this is what I wanted to show you. You got rooftop access. It's a really pretty view. I just think it looks really awesome. You can see the rooftops of the other buildings. And yeah, if I really wanted to, I could just climb up here and get on top of this roof. Probably really dangerous, so I won't do that in this video, but yeah. I decided to sit down. Hopefully it'll shield me from the wind. But the first pro I want to talk about, and this is a big one, but a variety of sizes. You'd be surprised how many brands don't offer you a variety of sizes. Some brands will make you think like they're good at this, but then what they really do is they shrink it and pink it. They'll basically give you the smaller versions, but they're only going to be feminine, and they're going to have bright colors, diamonds, and they're not going to be cool. A brand that I think does a really great job of offering a variety of sizes in a unisex design would be Rolex. I love their OP line. You got 29, you got 31, 34, 36, and 40mm. They do a great job of catering to everyone, and there's no diamonds, there are bright colors, but they're throughout the whole line. It's not just like feminine colors, and I think they do a great job. A brand that does not do so good is Omega. Omega is my #1 enemy when it comes to this Aquaterra line. What a cool line, only ruined by the way they handle it. The 40mm looks super big and masculine, looks great, and then you just get smaller and smaller, and then soon the indices are all oval and rounded, and they might as well look like diamonds. It's just an awful way to go about it. I don't like the Aquaterra line from Omega, #1 enemy for a small wrist like me. I actually like the nature background more, so we're going to go back over there and talk about the pros of this watch. But the first pro would be the vintage aesthetics. There's a lot of different vintage aesthetics on this watch, but I want to start with the domed crystal. It's a double dome sapphire with a layer of anti-reflective coating on the inside, and it's just really pretty, and I love dome crystals on vintage inspired watches. Anyways, the second vintage cue that I really love is going to be the faux rivets on the bracelet, and just overall the way the bracelet tapers. I think it's so comfortable on the wrist, and I think that the way they executed the faux rivets, it's a lot more true to how you would find rivets on vintage oyster bracelets. And of course, when you're walking and you see this watch on someone's wrist, you're never going to notice the faux rivets. I've never had anyone be like, oh, dude, those faux rivets, those look so ugly. Like, you know, if you like them, they're just for you because you're the only one who's going to see them, really. The third vintage aesthetic I really like is the rose gold accents, or in this case, it's bronze, and I think that it looks fantastic. I mean, the way it plays with the light in some angles, it just makes it pop, especially against that black dial. And then you add the dome crystal on top, chef's kiss. And then, of course, it doesn't end there. You get the bronze on the bezel as well. I personally love how the actual insert itself is completely normal, but then the bronze part is the knurling, and so you'll have the knurling as the bronze. And the fourth vintage aesthetic that I wanted to point out on this watch is the bezel to dial ratio. So modern dive watches have pretty thick bezels, and that's so you can read them, they're legible, and overall they just take up more space. With this watch, the bezel is thinner and the dial is bigger, and I just love that. I love the proportions of this watch. They did such a great job. The lug width is 17 millimeters instead of 18 millimeters, and so it makes the case wear larger because the band looks smaller in comparison. And so same thing with the bezel and dial. If the bezel looks smaller, it makes the dial look bigger. Overall, it makes this watch, even though it's a 36 millimeter dive watch, it just wears right. You know, the proportions seem way better, and I love this watch. The third pro is going to be the brand itself. So Oris was founded in 1904, which means that makes it older than Rolex, and that means it's about a century old, so 100 years old, and that's just insane. And they weren't wasting their time either. They were doing a lot of cool watchmaking. Early on in 1938, they were an integrated manufacturer, which means they made their own movements, and they made the pointer date. That's one of their other popular lines. And overall, they're just an amazing watchmaker. They were even one of the first watchmakers and employers to employ both women and men, which means that they were just really inclusive for the time, which I think is awesome. Oris is so good that by 1969, they were in the top 10 of watchmaking, but they're not anymore, and we'll talk about that later in the con section. This watch was meant for greatness. I feel like it was meant for people like me who love vintage aesthetics, but they also appreciate the modern, being able to swim with it, you know, just general movement reliability. So it frustrates me so much that this watch is not perfect. There are a couple cons we gotta talk about. Number one is the inconsistent lume. This watch is a big offender of that. For some reason, I think it's because they use Fotina, but it's not even matching. So the hands will shine much brighter than the indices. And I don't know why this is. It really bugs me. I know it bugs other people. This is a big reason why I didn't buy the Pelagos 39, because I know it's a big issue on that watch too. For the new ones, you're paying for maybe $2,000, $3,000 plus for these watches. And for them not to have consistent lume, I mean, of course, I don't know what the other models are like, but with this one specifically, I'm just kind of like peeved that why is it not consistent, you know? I have a Seiko that is the Seiko SKX, and that watch was originally $200 when it came out, and that watch, every single bit of lume on there is consistent, even the lume pip on top. The second con I have with this watch is the fact that it is a 4 Hz movement with a 38-hour power reserve, and that's okay. I mean, it's not amazing, it's not terrible. My smaller 34 millimeter Rolex has I think it's a 4 Hz movement with a 55-hour power reserve. And again, you know, we're just talking specs here, and watches aren't all about the specs. You should never just, you know, simplify a watch to its specs. It's a lot more than that. There's so much more that goes into a watch. But I have noticed when I put this watch down, I notice when it's not running and I have to set it. It's just a con that's there. I like the instantaneous date switch. I think that's a really cool little add-on. It doesn't have to be there, but it's nice that this movement has it. And of course, with that quick change date, it's going to be really easy to switch. So overall, it's a good movement. I've noticed that when I put it down for a couple days, you know, I noticed that I have to set it again. So the third con for me would have to be the 17 millimeter lug width. And that just is really going to limit your strap options. I don't know where you're going to find a 17 millimeter NATO strap. Basically, the way it works is the 36 millimeter diameter watch is going to be 17 millimeters lug width. and then the 40mm, and I believe the 38 as well, is going to be 19mm lug widths. So either way, you're always going to have an odd lug width, but I think that the bracelet itself is sufficient, and I really like it. It's a really well-made bracelet. I'm not complaining at all, and I think that if I had to keep it on this, I wouldn't be worried about it. I know there are some people out there that love switching out straps. Maybe this isn't the watch for you. And lastly, I really want to touch on why did Oris as a brand kind of fall off. They sold off to Swatch Group. I mean, it wasn't called Swatch Group at the time, and then their watchmakers got cut down to basically like a dozen people or so. And that was really unfortunate for the brand because they lost a lot of their momentum. That was around the quartz crisis. They're lucky that they didn't go out of business like a bunch of other brands. A lot of those other brands really suffered from the quartz crisis. And so the fact that Oris is even still with us today is honestly like really cool. Oris, eventually they bought themselves into independence again, and now they are an independent watchmaker, which I fully support independent watchmaking. I think that's really cool. I guess I'll wrap it up by saying I feel like we don't really hear about Oris a lot. They're never really a hype brand. They'll release maybe like a weird watch and people will talk about it for a little bit, but then we just don't hear about them anymore. But they really are an amazing brand, and I'd love to talk about the red pointer date next. If that video's already been made, I'll link it right here for you. If not, go check out the watches I spend my own money on. It'll be linked in a playlist down below. If you enjoyed this video, it really does help it if you actually click that like button, because it does push my videos out to newer people, and I'd really appreciate that. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.